it impractical. I guess we're glad it's being recorded. All right, so let me figure out where I was here. I'll just start fresh. The governor has declared a state of emergency due to the COVID-19 pandemic, and the nature of this declared emergency makes it impractical or unsafe for the Regional Transit Partnership to assemble in a single location. This meeting and the required public hearings will be held utilizing electronic virtual communication with the Zoom software application and in accordance with virtual meeting procedures and policies as outlined in item 4.0-01 of the Virginia State Budget, House Bill 29, effective April 24th, 2020. The meeting will be recorded and made available to the public at tjpdc.org. And the next order of business is to take our official attendance. Jessica, could you call folks' names out and for me, please? And if everybody will either acknowledge yes, or perhaps do raise your hand or something so we can catch you.
Diantha McKeel.
I'm here.
Lucas Ames.
Here.
B. Lepisto Kirtley. Lloyd Snook. Nakaya Walker.
Present.
Neil Sherman.
Here.
Randy Parker.
Here.
And Becca was not able to join us, but she has sent an alternate, Kendall Howard.
Welcome, Kendall. There you are.
Garland Williams.
Here.
Karen Davis.
Here.
Jim Foley.
Here.
Let's see, Sandy Shackelford.
She just had a computer issue and got logged off. She's logging back in.
Okay. Sarah Pennington.
Here.
Sally LeBeau. Peter Thompson couldn't join us today, and that's everyone. Thanks, Diantha.
Okay, great. And let me just ask, Chuck Proctor is not on yet, Jessica, is he?
No,
don't
he is
see him.
not.
All right, we're going to see if we can adjust the agenda, if that works for folks, because Karen and Jim have to leave early. So what I'd love to do is to move up the fuel update after Wood Hudson's presentation, if it works for Chuck when he gets here. And then, so we'll just move the fuel update earlier and then continue after that. And that lets Karen and Jim participate if there are no objections with that change. And I see B just signed on, so we have B now. All right, welcome. Good. So with that, the first item on our agenda, as always, are matters from the public. A limit of 3 minutes per speaker. And Jessica, do we have anyone signed up to speak today?
Yes, Susan Cruz would like to speak today.
Okay. Oh, there's Susan. Hi. Welcome.
Hi, everyone. My name is Susan Cruz, and I'm the Executive Director of the Community Climate Collaborative. And I haven't been able to come to a lot of these meetings, but I want you to know how much I appreciate your efforts to work toward greater coordination of our transportation planning in our community. Both the City of Charlottesville and Albemarle County have set ambitious targets to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions by 45% by 2030 and to reach carbon neutrality by 2050. To accomplish these goals, reducing emissions from transportation is critical. 27% of Charlottesville's emissions and 48% of Albemarle County's emissions come from transportation, or more specifically, from the cars we drive. Transportation is also one of the largest expenses that households face in our community after housing and its associated energy costs. The average amount spent by a middle income family can be 20% of income on transportation, and the average amount spent by a lower income family can be 30% of income on transportation. So, C3, we really believe that we can address both community climate emissions and cost burdens by families by investing and expanding our transit in our community with a focus on service to members of our community, with the highest cost burden and the least efficient vehicles. It is far more effective from a climate perspective to replace a car driver who has a more expensive to operate car that requires more fuel with a bus rider than to replace a person who has a more efficient vehicle, a hybrid driver, an electric vehicle driver with a transit rider. So we really, we're actually doing some research on this topic right now, and we're going to be releasing our report in July, and really looking at those intersections of where expanding service in our community can have the greatest economic impact, social impact, and climate impacts. Transit expansion, also one of the other things we're looking at in our study is we did a broad community survey and conducted some focus groups. Personally, I started working to use CAT as my major mode of transportation for work back in 2019. I love the bus service. I love my route. And my major problem is that it doesn't run frequently enough, and it is not reliable enough for me to plan departure from work to come back home in the evening. And we heard through our focus groups, many folks having trouble accessing bus stops, having to cross multiple lanes of 29 to reach safe bus stops. And also members of our community, Spanish-speaking members of our community who cannot use bus service to reach their preferred church services that are conducted in Spanish on Sundays. So there are some real issues of access in our community that we need to fix. And expanding transit and focusing on expanding transit and modernizing transit and its fuel sourcing through electrification to get us ready for carbon neutrality is just critical. So I'm grateful for the work you're doing, and looking forward to discussing more of these solutions with you and sharing our report's findings.
Sorry. Sorry. I think, do we have another speaker? I think I saw, there we go. Can you identify yourself? I think that's Randy.
Yeah. I'm Randy Salzman, not Gene Lidka. My computer doesn't have good audio, so I'm using my wife's, Gene Lidka's. I want to first of all thank you for letting me talk to you briefly, and secondly, I will be trying to talk to several of y'all individually. And I want to relate specifically to what Ms. Cruz says. We need to understand why people take the bus or don't take the bus, why people bicycle or don't bicycle, why people drive or don't drive. And there is another car culture which has done this exceptionally well, and that car culture is Australia, where they have just as high a per capita car ownership as we do in the United States. They have done over the last 15 years, had tremendous effects of decreasing vehicle kilometers traveled about 14%. And to give you an idea, this is better than the United States did last year when our economy collapsed during the COVID, and about 3 times the decrease in vehicle miles traveled that took place in the 2008 gasoline crisis. And I think we can adapt that program. And right now, with the Biden administration, with the 2 new czars, Gina McCarthy and John Kerry, and the most innovative transportation secretary probably ever, Pete Buttigieg, we are in the point where we could go out, we being Albemarle and Charlottesville, and go after a federal grant which would allow us to take this travel smart operation in Australia, adapt it to the wonderful things that are being done in rideshare, and really understand how people use, don't use, and then spend the money on the infrastructure that will help more people use. To give you an idea of how effective this has been, in Perth, it's Western Australia. In the early 80s, they were totally destroying. They were eliminating commuter rail, and then they started this program, and now they've done the entire Perth, Western Australia area. And they built a new commuter rail. It had a 90% approval ratings when it opened. It was a decade after that. In Melbourne, on the other side of the country, in Brisbane, especially in Brisbane, they have done this with over 300,000 families. It's been tremendously effective. And what I'm coming to you as an idea is right now is the time to go after a grant. I would love to spend 30 minutes of your time and explain to you how it works and how we can adapt it here for our community and lead America. It has been tried in 4 American cities in a George Bush the son, believe it or not, George Bush the son pilot in 2004, 2005. It found an 8% decrease in vehicle miles traveled in only 6 weeks. Phenomenal effort at that particular time. So right now, because of the stars aligning at the federal level, this area could go after a grant that would be the leadership for helping America really do what Ms. Cruz has just talked about. Understand the individuals and how we can help them change, as opposed to building the change, building all the transit, and them not using it, which happens so very, very
Thank you.
often.
Thank you, Randy. I appreciate it. And I appreciate both of you coming today. It was great to hear from you.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else, Jessica? Just trying to keep our time going here. Anyone else?
No one else has let me know, but if people want to raise their hands, we can.
Is there anyone else from the public? No. All right. Thank you both for coming. The next
Thank
item,
you. Try to get me on your schedule. I'll get out of here. Thank you.
the next item on our agenda are our meeting minutes, and we do need to vote on the minutes. I will entertain any edits or corrections or a motion to approve. A motion to approve our minutes would be great.
So moved.
Thank you, B. And then a second from,
Second, Randy.
second from Randy. Thank you. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Aye.
Any abstentions?
I'm gonna abstain. I left after, we're doing item 6, so I'm not.
Okay, great, Nakia. Thank you. So Nakia is abstaining. Any other abstentions from the voting members? All right, so we have the minutes from April are approved. Next item on our agenda, Jessica, is the member spotlight. And I think you were going to introduce this item.
Yeah, so really briefly, we just want to give this partnership the opportunity to get to know each other in a more personal way. So we're going to take turns. We're going to start with Sarah Pennington and Sandy Shackelford. And this is just a really brief couple of minutes opportunity for them to share their experience, a happy transit memory, what they're excited about working on with regards to transit right now, and what about transit they're most excited about looking into the future. So I hope that all of you will be excited to share your own backgrounds at some point in the future. It doesn't have to be a big thing. It's just this brief thing for us to get to know each other better.
Who's starting?
I guess I will start. So many of you I do know, but just in case, I'm Sarah Pennington. I am the TDM program manager at the TJPDC, which oversees the rideshare program that we have here. I have been with the PDC. It will be 11 years come August. Time flies. And that was pretty much my introduction into TDM, Transportation Demand Management, and the transportation arena in general. My background is in public relations, communications, and marketing, which was a really good fit for the rideshare program in the sense that a lot of it is coordinating and communicating with folks and getting the word out. One of the things I love most about working for rideshare and working in the transportation sector is all of the partnerships that come together. You know, transportation doesn't just work in a silo. There are so many moving parts and moving pieces, and the more that we can work together and band together to help each other out, the better. You know, it's pretty rare that I don't have a week that goes by where I'm not referring someone to different transportation options other than the carpooling and van pooling coordination that rideshare does. So I'm referring folks to CAT, I'm referring folks to JAUNT. And then of course with rideshare, anyone who's using alternative forms of transportation to get to and from work can also be part of our guaranteed ride home program, which I think is a huge benefit for folks who are looking to get out of their cars. It's a hard behavior to get for people to change. And then, of course, the big thing in this last bit of the pandemic is this tiny little portion of what I did called telework has somehow morphed into a large part of our programming at Rideshare. And, you know, even prior to the pandemic, it was actually the fastest growing alternative working commute. So that has now changed the landscape as well. So I think there's a lot of opportunity coming out of the pandemic to reach people as they are changing their lives and changing their behaviors to potentially come back to work. It's kind of a strike while the iron is hot. So I think it's very exciting.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you. All right, you're on.
All right, I'm going to try to set the bar really low, so whoever goes next doesn't feel any pressure to put on any sort of major production to develop their spotlight. My name's Sandy Shackelford. I'm the Director of Planning and Transportation for the TJPDC. And before I worked at the PDC, I've been here for about 2 years now. I worked in local government for oh goodness, close to 10 years, 11 years, something like that, and then moved to the PDC. I actually got my professional start though doing transportation policy research for the American Trucking Associations. So I'm kind of back to where I started a little bit, doing more research focused and planning focused work versus the local government regulation type of things I was doing for the local governments. My background is in policy. So I'd probably say that I have a skill set that can be applied very broadly across a lot of policy areas, but I think my real interest and the things I get excited about are being able to work in terms of building consensus and finding practical solutions to problems. I think that's something that I really like to be able to work with multiple stakeholders to really start fitting pieces together and finding creative solutions to challenges. So that's something that I'm really excited about with the transit opportunities that are happening right now, is being able to hear from the community and start working with you all to see how everybody can come together to find the right opportunities to meet the needs of the community. I will say, just as far as personal experience with transit, just to give you guys a fun little story. I went to Georgia Tech, so I rode I used the MARTA system, that's their public transit system, in Atlanta quite a bit, but that system is very linear. They really only have a couple tracks and they go in 2 different directions and there's a central hub. So it was really easy to use. You couldn't get to a lot of places using just the train, but that one was really easy. So I took a work trip early on in my career to Boston, which had a much different system. And I went to meet a friend that lived there. And coming back, I couldn't remember which stop to get off on, and it was really late at night, and I got off on the wrong stop. And I remember wandering around for a long time, not really knowing exactly where I was before GPS was as up to date as it was. So that was one scary story. But a couple of years later, I went up to meet a friend in New York for the New York City Marathon. And that was a much better experience because the GPS technology really helped navigate through the transit system in New York. And so it was just a fun little personal experience to see how the technology made it so much more accessible for somebody to remove that barrier to entry to be able to use transit as a transportation option.
Great, very interesting about the GPS technology in the transit. That's great. Thank you, ladies, both of you, very much. The next item on our agenda is the item Smart Scale Opportunities for Transit, and Wood Hudson is going to be the presenter. And Wood, welcome back. Do you feel like you've come home, Wood?
Oh, sorry, I was on mute. I'm trying to figure out how to share. I have like 9 screens running today, so bear with me a second. Can you all see the correct slide deck and not like the slide notes screen?
No, we're good.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. Good. So, well, thank you guys for having me out to present on Smart Scale. I'm one of the transit planners here at the Department of Rail and Public Transportation. And as Diantha alluded to before, I used to work at TJPDC, so I am well-versed in the transit issues and transit discussions that have been going on in the Charlottesville community for a long time. I'm going to run through a rather short presentation today and try to give you all a bit of an overview of how transit projects can fit into kind of the smart scale rubric. I'll be covering kind of a basic introduction to smart scale. I do apologize. For some folks, especially the planners, this is probably going to be a bit repetitive. It's we heavily borrowed from OIP's kind of standard slide deck on smart scale. For other folks, it's going to be some new and really good information. I'll then go into some details regarding how a smart scale application can be developed, some of the data requirements, the scoring methodology that we use to evaluate transit projects, and then I'll kind of touch on some example transit projects that from the past round of smart scale. And then I'll pause and kind of provide a little bit of time for folks to ask questions. So without further ado, what is smart scale? Smart scale seeks to invest limited tax dollars in the right projects that meet the most critical transportation needs through a data-based prioritization process. Projects are evaluated on a uniform set of measures that are applicable statewide, these being safety, congestion mitigation, accessibility, land use, environmental quality, and economic development. These measures are valued with different weights depending on an applicant's category type and area, which often mirror regional priorities. For example, the congestion mitigation factor may be weighted the heaviest in one area category, while in another it may be economic development scores that have the greatest weight in the smart scale scoring rubric. Smart scale is a biennial process that follows the project development, submission, scoring, and selection kind of procedure. After project selection, approximately 1 year lapses before intake period begins again. Applicants are generally encouraged to use that kind of 1 year off year to kind of develop their projects. You know, they can reach out to us for technical assistance. I know VDOT does provide some technical assistance as well. Just kind of an FYI, round 5 intake will begin in March of 2022, which seems like it's a long way off, but really in terms of developing projects that can, you know, go in a flash. For transit projects, there's some general categories of eligibility for the funding. Transit projects can either be a standalone transit-specific application, or transit may be a component of a larger multimodal or roadway-focused project. We refer to those as transit primary or transit secondary applications. The main requirement of an eligible transit application is it needs to be capital in nature, and the improvement needs to focus on kind of like a rider-focused improvement. Generally, it's you know, funding something like a facility that's really just to meet like a state of good repair is not something that tends to be eligible for smart scale. Here's some examples of eligible projects. Rolling stock for new or expanded service, transfer stations and facilities, rail infrastructure, transit technology, passenger amenities, and bus-only lanes and facilities. Generally eligible MPOs, planning district commissions, and then county, cities, and towns, and other political subdivisions of the Commonwealth. If somebody is applying for a transit project or a transit component and is not a transit agency, they do need to get a letter of support from the transit agency stating that that transit agency is in support of the project and has available operating funds to operate that application when they move forward. And that's kind of just a footnote and an FYI, because we do have a fair number of transit-focused projects that come from localities. So when you are developing a transit application, there are some very specific data requirements that we need to be able to adequately evaluate the project. We need an existing inventory of stop level and route level ridership for impacted stops and routes. If it's a new service, there's some additional components that come with that. We need route geographies. We try to get that in a form that we can utilize, not just like a highlighter line on a map, but either like the spatial GIS data, GTFS, or kind of other standard formats. The cost of the transit/rail features. Surprisingly, this is one of the places where we do see some issues is folks have baked the transit cost into a larger project cost because it can end up being, like 1 or 2% of like a large streetscaping project. But we do need to be able to identify and see those costs in an estimate to be able to clearly evaluate and benchmark those. When we see new transit, there are some additional requirements. We now require a feasibility study that includes ridership projection, a new route alignment, a proposed schedule, and that letter of support saying that the agency is committed to operating the new service and has operating funds available to do so. Integrating transit components into roadway projects. This is probably the most common type of application that we see, especially in round 4. There were, I'm going to guess and say we had over 35 applications that included a transit component. These applications can be very successful because transit components can be kind of an overall a very cost-effective solution, and thus increase the overall project score because of that reduction in congestion on the roadway. A couple things about doing these transit secondary type projects. The transit feature must be contiguous with the overall project improvements. Essentially, if you're doing a streetscaping project on road A, you can't go and say, oh, but we're going to put in shelters and benches on road B, which is like 3 blocks away. They have to be directly contiguous. Again, cost must be included, and we must be able to like identify the transit specific components on kind of all of the spec sheets and the designs and things like that. Some really common types of projects that fit this category are passenger amenities, benches and shelters, sidewalk connectivity to transit stops. These are all things that we saw in round 4 and tend to do very well because they can be rather low cost in nature. We've also seen some bus only lanes, BRT station expansion, bus pullouts, which is essentially a small pocket lane on like a mainline roadway where a bus can pull out and get out of the way of the flow of traffic, and then some transit signal priority where a corridor is being retrofitted, signals in a corridor are being retrofitted, and they add technology in that particular corridor to allow things like transit vehicle preemption or kind of dynamic signalization in the corridor to optimize transit vehicle flow. Scoring. So when a transit project comes in, the primary area that DRPT focuses on is the congestion mitigation factor. Kind of an overview of that factor. Project congestion mitigation scores are derived from 2 measures. 50% of the score is from an increase in person throughput, and another 50% of that score is reduction in person hours of delay. The way transit works is an increase in transit ridership removes passenger car trips from the roadway due to mode shift, resulting in an increased person throughput and a reduction in person hours of delay. This is why it's really important that when a transit application is submitted that we have good quality existing ridership data so that we can do that delta calculation and come up with that kind of reduction in person hour delay, increase in person throughput. We internally QC all of our projects. Transit benefits are additionally scored for accessibility and safety factor areas. That's carried out by the OIP scoring team. They use a variety of different products that are similarly used to their roadway scoring metrics for that. Then projects receive a final score based on the results from other factor areas and factor weighting. Final smart scale score is then derived from the benefit and the smart scale cost / funding request. This is where we always like to point out that smart scale is on 100% funding pot. However, additional dollars placed on projects can have an impact on that final project smart scale score by reducing the amount that the project is requesting from the smart scale pot. So this next slide is really a comparison between kind of the two major funding pathways for transit capital projects, smart scale that we've kind of touched on, and then our DRPT merit capital program. So I'll just kind of run through the comparison between the two programs. Smart scale is has a much more open type of project that can be applied for: roadway, transit, rail, and TDM. DRPT's merit capital program is limited to transit-only projects. Funding timeline: smart scale funds are generally programmed 4 to 6 years following the SIP adoption. So this is very different than the merit program for DRPT, where funds are available July 1st immediately following SIP adoption. Local match requirements: none for smart scale. For the DRPT merit program, at least 4%. State of good repair projects are not eligible for smart scale, but are eligible for DRPT. Support vehicle eligibility is not something that you can apply for in smart scale, but is something that we do fund through the DRPT merit capital program. Funding rates: fully funded when a select project is funded, essentially. The DRPT program, it's up to 68% for minor enhancement and state of good repair projects, and up to 50% for major expansion. And the DRPT one generally is only allocating state resources, whereas smart scale might be a combination of different funding resources. So I'm going to run through two sample projects from round 4 smart scale. The first one is one of our transit-only applications. This was a GRTC application, Greater Richmond Transit Company, for new articulated buses to serve the BRT route. The data that the applicant provided included existing weekday ridership, proposed route alignment and schedule, the cost of the new transit vehicles, and the ridership growth rate. Additional data that we utilized in the evaluation process included passenger miles traveled, unlinked passenger trips, and annual average weekday daily traffic. Another project was the West Main Streetscape Project, Phase 3, 8th Street to northwest to Roosevelt Brown. Probably a project that is very familiar to folks on this call. This was a bike and pedestrian with secondary transit features. Data provided included existing stop level ridership for stops receiving a shelter. Shelter cost, shelter location was clearly shown on the project sketch. Route geography for all routes that utilized these new shelters. Additional data that we used was passenger miles traveled, unlinked passenger trips, and annual average weekday daily traffic. Some really good resources as you all consider transit applications: the Smart Scale Technical Guide, the local transit development plans for CAT and JAUNT, and previously funded smart scale projects, the public dashboard allows you to do a project search, and you can kind of see what other people have applied for, how they've structured their applications, and kind of how they fared in the various rounds of Smart Scale. Additionally, DRPT transit staff is available to do some technical support and kind of help you all like envision your project and figure out what resources are needed. And lastly, DRPT does have a technical assistance funding program. We call it TA. It is a 50-50 grant program, and Smart Scale readiness and application development is an eligible category for that funding stream. And with that, I'll kind of switch over to questions mode and leave up the contact information for myself and the entire planning team. I also have on the line my colleague, Taylor Jenkins. She's kind of our Smart Scale guru, and she might jump in if there's a question or two that I'm unable to answer.
And Wood, thank you very much. That was a great presentation. And would you send the presentation to Jessica so she can forward it to all of us?
Absolutely.
That would be great. And so we'll open it up for questions if anyone has a question. Of course, I can't see any hands or anything, Jessica, so. Why don't you, Wood, why don't you show us everybody, why don't you take your presentation down so we can see faces? That might help. That was a great presentation. Thank you.
Hey, Wood, this is Christine.
All right.
Did you say that the TA funds, the technical assistance, were for help in preparing the Smart Scale applications?
They can be used, you know, if you were doing if you needed a study or something, that is an eligible expense for a TA application. It's pretty permissive what can be funded through TA. So if there was something that you had in mind, you know, I would suggest that you just get in contact and we can kind of discuss and see if it would be an exact fit or how to shape it into something that might be a fit for the program. You know, competitiveness varies year to year based on funding availability and the number of applicants that apply for the TA funding.
Wood, we learned that the hard way. One should never apply for Smart Scale funding when there's a $1 billion tunnel up for funding.
Yeah.
Just teasing, yes. Yeah. All right, with that, if there are no questions, I'm sure Wood would be happy if you emailed him questions that you might have, and
Absolutely.
we'll get the presentation and share it with everybody. Thank you. And I am going to
Thank
ask,
you.
thank you, Wood, if we can just adjust the agenda a little bit because both Karen and Jim have to leave. So if we could move down to the fuel update. And I understand from Jessica that Chuck Proctor had something that came up at the last minute. So we'll have to catch him at another meeting, I believe, Jessica. So with that fuel update, what we were asking for, given the situation that happened with the Colonial Pipeline, we were curious as to how, I thought it would be interesting to just chat for a minute as to how that played out in our local community with the gas shortage. So Karen, I'll kick that off to you so that you can leave as quickly as possible, because I know you have another commitment.
Thank you. Well, I have to say it really showed a vulnerability that we didn't realize we had. We don't have any tanks or backup gas, and so we are definitely at the mercy of the commercial gas structure. So, and also we cover such a large regional area. You know, that's one of the reasons we have that type of structure. So it did impact our services. We did decide to reduce down to critical service only, critical ADA, critical medical trips in the rural areas. And we had to cancel our Connect services, which we really hate to do. But got them back up and running a couple days later. We worked cooperatively. We have staff everywhere, of course, drivers everywhere communicating where fuel might, you know, have gotten restocked. And of course, now we all have Gas Buddy on our phones, and we're communicating about that. I did, immediately reach out, and of course, my community transit partners all use diesel. So they offered up, help, but they didn't have much help to offer. However, thanks to Garland and the city, we did start some early discussions about having something in place for an emergency like this in the future. And it's something that my staff are starting to work on in terms of getting daily consumption broken out into the different areas of our service, which we will be able to, excuse me, pull together. And then I think by locality, just deciding in an emergency like that, what level of service would you want to have available from JAUNT, and then kind of figuring out how many gallons that is and what the cost would be, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that would be a really great layer of protection and support for our system to have in place in the future. We did, of course, put out our electric vehicle. Usually everyone says, what if the grid goes down? Your electric vehicles don't run. No one expected gas to be disrupted. So that was a nice win to have that out in service and able to provide some support.
Great. Are there any questions for Karen? Anybody have a question you want to ask? B.
Yes, thank you, Karen. And what are you thinking of? Are you thinking of some kind of holding tanks or something somewhere?
Just hopefully accessing the tanks already available, the supply already available in the localities themselves. Most localities will have reserves for especially emergency vehicles, et cetera. So just accessing that, just letting them know that we want to be part of the discussion. And like I said, it's maybe all localities, the critical medical is just all they want to sustain through a period of time like that, which would be certainly a smaller amount of fuel than we normally use. But I think it's a good conversation to have.
Have you reached out to the 2 new Wawa stations? Because they seem to be a really good community supporter, and they may also have tanks, and those stations just opened up recently. But I mean, I would think that they would want to also be of assistance, so it might be worthwhile.
Yeah, thank you. And it really revealed some unique supply chains. Costco has its own resources, so it was able to say completely fueled during the event, or for the most part. So yes. Checking to see those organizations, companies that have resources beyond just the general supply is important.
All right, with that, let me jump down to Jim, because I know you have to leave early too. Jim, you want to address Albemarle County Public Schools?
Sure. Can everyone hear me?
Yes, we can hear you fine.
Yeah, I'm driving. I pulled over. Yeah, so my department, the transportation department, we manage the 7 fuel tanks that are owned by the county. 4 of those tanks are unleaded and 3 are diesel. My department uses almost all diesel, and other county vehicles use almost all unleaded, to include emergency vehicles. So in working with Trevor and his folks, we were able to stay at acceptable levels the whole time. I think it really helped us that we did an RFP a couple of years ago. So we had a dedicated vendor who prioritized delivering to us. So our main focus was to make sure emergency vehicles were able to get fuel for their vehicles. So and we were able to procure probably, I'm going to guess, about 4 trucks in the last couple of weeks. So we received 8,500 gallons of unleaded last night, and we feel like we're out of the woods right now. So I think the thing probably I learned the most was that I think having that RFP and having a dedicated vendor really helped in our situation.
Great. Any questions for Jim?
Diantha, can I add to that?
Absolutely, Trevor. I was
Yeah,
going to
really,
ask.
it's broader than just the impact on school transportation, but as Jim mentioned, we essentially formed an incident management team. We didn't formally do that, but we had folks from building services, VMF, Jim and William Shiflett, who did a great job communicating, along with facilities, PD, our communications office, and the sheriff's department. And we met about every 3 days. When the panic first hit, we communicated out organizationally that everybody that could work from home should work from home. And also we stood down any non-essential travel for normal county business. And we extended that, a week and a half or so. Folks started coming back kind of once supplies were more readily available. Folks that had been working out of the offices started coming back. But it wasn't until actually just today that we have kind of gone back to normal non-essential travel. So DSS, PD, facilities, all of those entities that had some discretionary trips, those were stood down to prioritize and to minimize our use. So that was a whole really county effort that rallied around this interesting episode that we had.
Right. That's great, Trevor. Does anybody have any questions for Trevor? All right. Thank you. Appreciate it. And Garland, I think it's your turn for maybe city schools as well as CAT.
Sure. So CAT and city schools, we didn't really have any issues. We were able to get fuel. It was about a day delay. Right before the pipeline issue became a real issue, we had already put in for an additional order of diesel fuel. So it was our regular system that just basically bumped it up a couple of days. And on the gasoline side, the city fleet management and public works basically shifted the majority of their filling to police, fire, and school bus and transit. So that made it us a priority. Where, like I said, we worked with Karen and see if we could try to work out something with her. That was kind of a priority because part of what she does is our ADA, which is required. So we wanted to make sure she had fuel to be able to do that. But CAT basically ran our lifeline service uninterrupted.
Any questions for Garland? Thanks, Garland. And Kendall, you want to report out on UVA?
Sure. Yeah, essentially the same as Garland. We just got lucky. It wasn't any great like strategic planning or anything. We just got lucky with our fuel delivery in that it hit our diesel delivery, especially that it hit right before this whole pipeline thing. And so we're currently burning about 500 gallons of diesel a day, and our below ground tank holds 10,000 gallons. So we had a 2 week stretch of wiggle room, and we had just gotten a fresh load about 3 days prior. So it could have been a much bigger issue for us given slightly different timing. And so that's leading us to kind of go the same path as Karen to explore some options for backup.
Okay. Any questions? I guess we have 5 transit providers in this community, so I guess you get into a bad situation, working together is a real positive if you can, right? For sure.
For a second there, it felt like we were going to live the plot of Mad Max, though. It was getting kind of scary.
All right. Any other questions for Kendall? That's great. All right. Then we'll move back, if we could then please, Jessica. You were going to update us on our DRPT grants.
Yeah, thanks, Diantha. So I just will briefly speak about these. So for our regional transit vision plan, a lot of that technical and public engagement work is going to be done by consultants. So we put out an invitation for proposals, and we received 3 truly excellent proposals from 3 different consulting firms. The selection committee is in the process of reviewing those, and I expect that we'll be able to announce who we're going with at our next RTP meeting. So that's it for that update. And then the Albemarle County Transit Expansion Study. So we have already given a notice to proceed to the Michael Baker Foursquare team. We're currently working on the details of the public engagement plan. We are planning our first public engagement session for that project in late July or early August. They're going to finish up all of the needs assessment work before they bring that information to the public and then seek public input. And I see Trevor has a question.
Yep. Trevor.
Thanks. Really just sharing for those that are on at this meeting that are on the study. I have connected up to Ravenna Station and Research Park and have several folks that are interested in participating in that in a work group at the right time for that process.
Great. So we need to make sure we make that connection. I also talked to Roger Johnson, the Albemarle County Economic Development Director, and he would like to have the opportunity to connect as well through his office. So I just don't want to forget. This is a good time to remind myself to say that to you, Jessica. So we want to put Roger Johnson in the Economic Development Group for that Albemarle County grant. Any other any questions for Jessica on those 2 grants? They're moving forward, which is good news. Okay. All right. Then the next item, I think, Lucinda, this is your time to shine. We have the tip update. And I'm trying to find Lucinda. There you are.
Yeah, thanks, Diantha. So in your packet, there's 3 memos, and we went over the first 2 memos in the April meeting. So I'm just going to go over the 3rd memo. And this is just an addition. There's 2 adjustments that were made, so they're not voted on by the policy board. They're just adjustments. And they're additions to operating funds for CAT and JAUNT. CAT increased the operating funds about 17.5, a little over $17.5 million. And JAUNT's operating funds were increased a little over $500,000. So are there any questions?
I did notice, and am I on the right place? I'm looking because some of this is, and we're all new at this. I'm looking at the JAUNT, and I think this is the new tip block. Is that correct? And it looks like JAUNT was purchasing, I was just trying to wrap my head around this, 6 electric buses in 21, in 22, 6 electric buses, 23, 10, and then in 24, 15 electric buses. Was that part of the change, or was that the standard, what you all had all along? That was
the one that we talked about in April. I don't have it up, but maybe Garland can answer that question.
This was JAUNT.
It's a JAUNT question.
Oh, I'm sorry, Karen.
That's okay. That's okay. I believe that was planning that had been done by our previous CEO. He was anticipating purchasing that many in those fiscal years, but now we're hoping to conduct a study and then purchase the electric vehicles off of the state contract going forward. So just a slightly different plan with the same goal. So when those buses were purchased, they weren't electric buses, they were gasoline. So they were just regular buses.
Yeah, and this says 6 electric. I was just pleased to see that you all
I know, don't get excited yet. No.
It's very good. Yeah, I just wanted to point it out because I thought it was great news. Were there any questions to Lucinda for the tip? Lucinda, was that it for you, or did you have something else you wanted to show us?
Nope, it was just those 2 adjustments.
Okay, all right. And then next we will go to MPO updates, I think, Sandy?
Joint session between the Charlottesville City Council and School Board. We amended the MPO Policy Board agenda for last night's meeting. So the only thing that the Policy Board did last night was they voted on the adoption of the Unified Planning Work Program. Jessica has included all that information in your packets. There is one point of clarification that I want to make, in that was actually voted on by the MPO Policy Board is under task 2 on the table that's in your memo for the long range transportation planning section. The climate action initiatives for transportation planning, that ended up being a total of $30,000. And so the balance from that $50,684 ended up being added to the on-call services line item. So what the policy board had voted on is that they wanted us to focus on coming up with some strategies on how to incorporate climate action planning considerations into our long-range transportation plan. So we're going to focus on that. And then they wanted to set aside the balance of that $50,000 total in order to have it available for an initiative that may not be identified at that point. Based on some of the conversations we're having with VDOT, as well as from the city and the county about their priorities, it sounds like there's probably going to be a list of things that we're going to have to choose from. So I'm pretty confident that that money is going to be programmed, within the first 3 or 4 months of the year. It's just, it hasn't been identified right now. But that was adopted at the policy board meeting last night. So that work program has been sent to it's been sent to Wood and to Chuck, our DRPT and VDOT contacts as the final adopted copy, and it'll be up on our website. The other thing I want to mention is that we are continuing to discuss our smart scale projects. We'll go back to revisit those. If anybody's interested in attending, we're going to have an extra MPO meeting in June. Normally the MPO policy board meets every other month, but because we had so much on the agenda, we couldn't just put everything off this month to accommodate the schedule. So we're going to have a meeting on June 23rd with the policy board, where we'll be talking about our smart scale projects and going through the rest of the business. There are a couple of agenda items that might be of interest to some of you all. There are some resolutions for the MPO policy board to support some local requests for funding through the Transportation Alternatives Program and the Safe Routes to School program. So we'll have that on the agenda next month, just for the policy board to provide their support for those projects. And I think the other thing that we'll briefly talk about is the PDC will be considering an application for a RAISE grant to look at a planning study for the Amtrak station. So that we'll also have a resolution to ask the MPO policy board to support that as well.
That's great. So maybe this group would be interested in receiving, Sandy, is there a way that you could send us a link to that or a little bit of information so that if people wanted to listen, they'd be able to do that?
Sure. What I can do is, or maybe Jessica, when she sends out the meeting notice, she can also include a link to the MPO policy board or the agenda, so you all can have that as well.
Yeah, I think that'd be interesting. Maybe some folks might be interested. That'd be great. All right. Any questions for Sandy? No questions. All right. And I don't think, Jessica, I've missed anything. Am I running on track here? Okay, I just want to make sure when I moved around that I don't want to skip anything. So our transit provider updates. We did a little bit of an update about the fuel shortage, but let's do a round robin again and see if there's anything else you want to tell us about. So Kat, in the City of Charlottesville Schools, Garland, we'll start with you this time.
Okay, thank you. So I know you highlighted on the tip part about JAUNT, but I wanted to sing Kat's praises a little bit too. The tip that we we were able to get in $17 million, which means we've got 6 expansion vehicles. And it's a difficult time for funding, and we were able to prove our case to this with the state and saying that it's a dedicated need for us to do so. That's really big for CAT, considering that we have reliability issues with some of our vehicles now. Just wanted to toot our horn on that one. So we're continuing.
Point me to the right. Can you point me to the page for that, and I'll go back and look at it? I didn't mean to slight you. It didn't jump out at me. I'm sorry.
Yeah, well, that's what I actually have to leave in a little bit. So I'm just we can
keep going. Keep
stuff
going.
later. I just wanted to make sure that a couple other things that we're working on, and I just the APC component is a done deal for us now. We have executed an agreement so we can actually move forward. UTA, which is the same provider that does the automatic passenger counters for University Transit, is the one who won the bid. That's huge. So that allows us to potentially share data, which is really good, to allow us to see, time, date stamp, you name it. We're going to be able to do a lot of slicing and dicing here very soon, as soon as we get ours in, validated, and work through the process. All of this will help us in future grant opportunities, because that's a really necessary component. The state wants to see route level detail, on and off counts, stop level. So having the APCs is a big step for us to being able to provide the state with the level of reporting that they want, need, and require of us to get funding for future, whether it's capital grants or smart skill applications. So we're moving right.
APC, for folks that might not know, we get into the alphabets, right?
Yes, APCs are automatic passenger counters.
Thank you. Thank you. So that's all good news.
Great news.
Yeah, that's great.
Yep.
All right, anything else?
That's it.
Okay. UTS, did you have anything, Kendall, you wanted to tell us?
I don't have any new or pressing news. We're going to be working through our sort of route structure post-COVID to start up with the fall semester in late August. So I think Becca will have something to share with you guys at next month's meeting for that, but nothing yet.
All right, great. And John, Karen, you're still here. So do you have anything?
Yeah, I stayed just so I could participate, then I gotta go. Yeah, just a couple of quick things. We had a really terrific visit from TJPDC. Christine's staff came out to ride a bus and tour the facility and check out some of the initiatives we have coming. I thought it was a great visit. It gave a chance for all the staff to get to know each other, and so we welcome anyone anytime. Coming out of that, Stephen Johnson, our transit manager, planning manager, participated in a panel about transportation and housing. And so he had a great experience. I thought he did a terrific job. And after his presentation, it was so effective. He's so well-spoken. I got a call from UVA Foundation talking about a service we had done for them that's right now it's discontinued, Park Connect, and he was so well-spoken that they called me saying, hey, on demand could actually meet our need better than the model that we were using. And I thought, that's terrific. That's a great thing for us to have a conversation with them and explore. I think the other two things that were of interest recently was both the Fralin Museum and the Botanical Gardens reached out to us to better understand JAUNT services and how we can help support the effort to make those two community resources more accessible to the community. And Fralin, we were talking right now, we're free, they're free. It seems like a great conversation to have with the community. Like, why not go to the museum and find out what you can do there. And they've put in some structure to make it more accessible. So of course the ADA is part of our service. And they reopened that renovation. We'll be doing some press releases around that too, about the service we can provide. So some nice stuff going on.
I will agree with you. Stephen did a great job on that panel. I participated in that, and it was a fascinating discussion. And Jessica, could you make available the link or however this group could find that podcast, or however it's stored, and just to be able to find it and listen? It was, I'm trying to remember, was it an hour and a half or an hour? Just an hour, I think, wasn't it? But anyway, it was really interesting around affordable housing and transit. So it's good. All right. Have I covered Jim Foley? I don't know if Jim's still there. I can't tell. Jim, are you still driving?
I'm still there. Can you hear me?
Yes, I think we can.
Okay, just real quick, so we are
Jim, we're not hearing you very well. I don't know if it's we may have to pass on this one, Jim. I'm not sure where you are. Yeah. I'm sorry, but we're not getting you, Jim. So technology is great, except when it's not. And I apologize, Jim, but I don't think we can hear you, sweetheart.
If voting places at one of our schools, I would advise you to avoid the drop-off and pickup times. We finished up with summer school to see if she could help. She offered her help, but I guess we won't need it. Okay, all right.
Okay, we're hearing that we're going to be avoiding the drop-off and pickup times at Albemarle High School, or no, Albemarle Public Schools, I guess, in general. So I think that's what we heard. Anyway, I think with that, we have finished our agenda. Because we're ending a little early, but my experience is that no one complains. It is a gorgeous evening, so maybe we can all get outside and enjoy the weather. And I really appreciate everybody participating. It's great to see everybody. And we will rally back around June the 24th will be our next meeting. And thank you very much with that. Unless someone wants to bring something up to the table, I'm happy to adjourn the meeting. Going, gone. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Good evening, everyone.
Good night.
Night.